Hey peeps, Sara here from Sparrow Springs, and today we are going to be doing some more painting, but this time we are going to be painting on t-shirts. So I'm going to show you how to put original artwork on t-shirts. I have two designs that I'm going to walk you through. One is more of like lettering, so it can kind of show you more like just a simple fill in one solid color, and then one is going to be more of an illustration inspired by his little stuffed animal dolphin. Let's go over some of the basics. If you've ever gotten acrylic paint on your clothes, you know that it's actually really hard to get out once it's on. For this, we're going to be using just any sort of basic acrylic paint. And then we also have a second item called textile medium. This medium is just something that you add to your paint, and it can turn it into more of a flexible fabric paint. That's really cool. And I will say, as far as t-shirts go, you can paint on pretty much anything, whether it's like jeans or cotton and whatnot. I will say that the stretchier it is, the harder it is to get a nicer design, and I'll explain more of that in a little bit. So let's get started. Before you start, make sure you've pre-washed your fabric. Then once I have my design, I carefully cut out the lettering with an X-Acto knife and center it on the t-shirt. I'm going to take a little bit of sponge with some white acrylic paint, pick up some paint on the sponge and stamp out the excess. Then I'm going to carefully stamp around the edges of my design, being careful to avoid the center of my letters where I don't want any paint. What this does is it creates a guide for me to follow when I actually start painting. If you have a Cricut or some way to actually stick your design to the t-shirt, this step becomes much faster and easier. If you feel comfortable freehanding, then you can skip this step altogether, but personally, hand lettering is not my strong suit, and I don't have a Cricut. So this method seemed reliable and cost-effective for me. Now we're going to mix our paint with our textile medium. The textile medium instructions say to mix 1 part medium with 2 parts paint. I didn't measure it out, but I've used this enough to know what consistency works really well. And this doesn't need to be exact. If you eyeball it, it should be fine, but you definitely don't want your paint to be runny. Once my paint is mixed, it's time to start painting. I'm going with a smaller brush so I can be more precise with my edges. At some point, I actually do switch to an even smaller brush, and this is going to be up to you and how comfortable you are in getting a clean edge. As I start painting, there are a few things to keep in mind. The biggest thing to remember is that we want to avoid stretching the material too much as we paint. When you stretch the material and get too much paint between the fibers, it can't snap back as easily, and your design will look kind of rippled, lumpy, and wrinkled. The stretchier your material is, the more careful you have to be. This is also why you want to wash your fabric first. Shrinkage is our enemy here. There are a couple tips to help you avoid this. Stippling is the most reliable method to avoid stretching. Stippling, instead of back and forth brush strokes, is more like a dabbing motion where you're just tapping paint to the surface. It doesn't push the fabric back and forth, and it can actually give you more of a solid deposit of paint on the fabric. That being said, it's harder to control detail. I ended up switching back and forth a few times, so my second tip for this is if you must do brush strokes, make sure you have enough paint and you don't apply a ton of pressure. Limit the amount of movement in your fabric as much as possible. From here, I continue to apply paint and layer until I don't see the fabric color anymore. In the end, I did about 4 layers, which gave it a nice clean finish. It can be difficult to get decent coverage on dark fabric. One way you can make this easier is by applying a thin layer of white and letting it dry thoroughly before you do the rest of your layers. It kind of acts like a primer or a base. I didn't do that with this particular design, but it only took me about 40 minutes to complete. I was really excited about this design. These t-shirts are for my son, Arrow. He is 14 months, but is still wearing mainly 6 to 12 month clothing and occasionally 3 to 6 month. He's kind of a peanut. However, I'm kind of at this point where I want to move him out of the onesies and more into just shirts and pants, but baby clothing is expensive, and a lot of the designs are kind of cheesy. But my husband has a Ferrari shirt. In case you didn't know, Ferrari is actually our last name. I totally married my husband for his last name. Anyways, I thought it would be kind of cute if Arrow had a matching Ferrari shirt. Disclaimer, I do not own any of the rights to the brand, and this is only a personal project. So that's the story behind it. I was really happy with how this one turned out, especially since me and hand lettering generally don't mix. Alright, now let's go on to the second design. I've created this illustration of my son's stuffed dolphin. I did the same thing in that I cut out the design with an X-Acto knife, but instead of using a sponge to make a silhouette, this time I am just using a ballpoint pen to trace. This is what I've usually done in the past, but you do have to be careful because the ballpoint pen can bleed through the paint. However, I planned on doing a black outline anyways, so it didn't really matter. I traced the outline of the entire design as well as the dolphin. Now as I start painting, I am just doing a solid white layer, and I'm going to let this dry thoroughly before I continue. I find that this is especially helpful for designs with more color changes and detail. Getting crisp lines on fabric is not particularly easy, but it's quite manageable if you have a base coat down. Now if you pay attention, I did use a larger brush to fill in the area a bit quicker, but as I laid in the paint I used brush strokes instead of stippling, which is fine, but it was starting to bubble up and kind of distort. Luckily I noticed it in time and lightened my pressure as I was painting, and the final design turned out just fine. Now we are finally at the point where we can paint in our design. I've gone ahead and pre-mixed my colors with the textile medium. Since I only have 3 colors, it's not too bad, and luckily these don't dry out as fast as if it was just acrylic. However, if you're going for more of a realistic or painterly look and you are mixing a lot of different colors, my suggestion to you would be to add textile medium to your pure colors, and if you need additional colors, then combine from your pre-mixed colors. Then you don't have to keep going back and forth adding textile medium to every new color you create. This design was actually really fun for me because the stuffed dolphin was actually something that I got in Chicago on a school trip when I was in like 6th grade. And you know, I liked it, but it wasn't like my favorite thing ever. So obviously when I had my son, it was like, oh, I have this stuffed animal, sure, I'll just pass it off onto him. And he loves it, and I don't understand why, but he does this adorable little thing where he grabs it and he hugs it, and he'll actually spin in a circle on the floor and just giggle. I don't know what it is, but he loves this thing. So I thought it'd be really fun to put it on a t-shirt, and then he can like kind of have it with him without actually dragging the stuffed animal everywhere. Okay, once you've finished with your design, I recommend letting the paint dry for at least 12 hours. It should not feel tacky. Then you can move on to your final step. We need to heat set the design to make it more sturdy and long lasting. And there are 3 different ways that you can do this. The first and probably the best method is by using an iron. I usually put the setting accordingly to the fabric I painted on. Now, it's very important that you do not put the iron directly on the painting, as this can ruin your painting and your iron. Some people will turn the fabric inside out and iron the backside. I like to just use a bit of tissue paper over the top of my design. Iron for about a minute, let it cool, and repeat this a few times. The next option is to just throw the fabric in the dryer on a high heat for about 20 minutes, and just make sure you don't have other articles of clothing in with it. The third option is to use a hairdryer. While this does work, it's probably not the best option, but you can set your hairdryer to high heat and go over the design for a couple minutes at a time, then let the surface and your hairdryer cool periodically. Repeat this a few times, and that's it. You're ready to go. And of course, you have to get your subject to model your brand new t-shirt design. What do you think, bub? Makes you look like Daddy. Alright peeps, thanks for watching. If you liked this video, please give it a thumbs up, and if you haven't already, please subscribe and turn on your notifications. That's all for now. I'll see you in the next video.